so you can make it clear.
Order.
Well, I did not make the comments.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with a panel of bloggers and opinion shapers. Joining me tonight, he is a social commentator, broadcaster, blogger, and is standing in this year's local body elections, Efeso Collins, and she is from New Zealand's largest feminist blog, The Hand Mirror, commentator, local board representative, and blogger, Julie Fairey. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1. Have the right given up on local council politics in Auckland, and what could a big win mean for progressive democracy in the city? Issue 2. The GCSB legislation has passed. Will it return to haunt Key in 2014? In issue 3 tonight, why is the government implementing draconian new employment laws aimed at attacking unions when unemployment is up to 6.4%? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. Local body elections are upon us, and the traditional right-wing candidates of the Citizens and Ratepayers bloc are looking tired, bored, and underprepared. Could the left-leaning blocs have one of their largest wins in Auckland political history? Julie, you are with the left bloc. Why does the right in Auckland look so tired and disorganised?
I think there's a couple of things going on. Firstly, I think they've had a bad time in opposition. They haven't been very united. They've really struggled to get much grip, which has been interesting because a lot of the criticism of the mayor has actually come from the left rather than from the right.
That's right.
Some of it very valid, I must say.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've noticed locally in our area is that they just don't seem to have a lot of depth as an organisation. We're outperforming them in terms of the online staff, in terms of the media, in terms of actually connecting with issues and being out in our community. They've got more hoardings than us, but that's because they always have more money than us. But just that on the ground stuff, I just don't get a sense there's real passion from most of their candidates for standing for CNR. They just don't seem to have a real vision of what they could achieve together, whereas a lot of the left people have been doing a lot of cooperation over the last 3 years, a lot of workshops together, that kind of stuff, and really have an idea of what they could do if elected in large numbers.
Do you think the left bloc have had a much better understanding of social media? I mean, if you look at the right, they're non-existent online.
I think partly, but I have to say I looked at our website hits the other day and was quite depressed because although we are doing far better online, the number of people who vote who are going to be looking at that don't know that it's actually, it'll be a factor, but it'll be a relatively small factor.
Efeso, you're on the streets right now trying to get people to vote for you. What are the issues that people are talking to you that matter?
I think for Pacific families, especially because we're out in South Auckland, I'm standing for the Otara local board, a lot of it comes down to, have we got enough money to feed the kids? Can we get our kids to school? Are we going to have an education system that's going to work for our young people? I think those are the main concerns that a lot of the people in Otara have at the moment. And I think whilst the right do look rather disorganised, it's most unfortunate that 3 of them have already been elected to council unopposed. And so whilst they're disorganised, they haven't had to do much to get those 3 onto council. And that causes me some concern. And there's got to be a better, bigger fight. And we can't just be saying to people like Cameron Brewer, here you go, look, we'll put it on a nice plate for you. You can waltz back into council, not do anything. I think the left have got to say, this is not possible. We are not going to do this. We're going to put up a fight. And sure, they might be saying, oh, you know, out in Ōrākei, he's going to win anyway. But we shouldn't just sit back and say, let's let them win and let's not do anything. Let's be a good, strong opposition. The other thing I think that's happening here with Citizens and Ratepayers is the focus at the moment is what's going on in Parliament. Everyone's looking at what's going on nationally, the nonsense around the GCSB bill. All of that has taken the attention away, I guess, from what the fact that the right-leaning people on council haven't made a very good opposition. And so I think because people are so loaded in their thinking around what's going on at Parliament, we haven't actually, you know, they've got a way, CNR have got a way of not having to be quite a united opposition anyway. So I think those are some of the things that are coming into play.
When we talk affordable housing, what is affordable in South Auckland?
Well, it's been able to pay the rent. And I would say that there are a huge number of low-income people and beneficiaries who are having to fork out close to $400 a week in a 3-bedroom house that is not warm, that hasn't been insulated. The government's doing absolutely nothing about. Affordable means we're not spending more than 50% of our income on housing. And if we can get it down to around 25-30%, then I think we're saying to people, look, it's not just about surviving, it's about living. We've just got people existing out in South Auckland because so much of their income is going towards their housing.
If they're paying that amount in just the rent, how do they get a deposit? How do they save for that deposit? Is that just not even a possibility for most South Auckland families?
No, not at all. And that's why so few Pacific families, so few South Auckland families own a house and will even consider trying to save for one.
Julie, has the Super City experiment failed local democracy or has it strengthened it?
I was a real Super City skeptic.
Yeah, we all were.
I thought this was going to be a disaster for local people, but actually the power of local boards, if harnessed and if it has the right advocates elected to that local board, huge.
Yeah.
The potential to actually put resources, council resources, into real local projects, into real local initiatives, and to not just addressing local needs, but strengthening where you're already doing a good job.
Yeah.
Just fantastic.
So
I've completely turned around on local boards.
Those who are watching, who are going, look, there's no point bloody voting because it doesn't really matter at the end, you'd say no, this really does matter?
Definitely, and we know that the further you get through the voting paper, the less likely people are to vote.
Yeah.
Poor local boards, we're the third off the rank.
Yep.
I feel really sorry for the DHBs because not only are they fourth off the rank, they're a bit more complicated to vote for.
Yep.
Please, if you don't want to vote for the mayoralty, if you don't want to vote for your ward councillor, please do go through and vote for your local board because they're the people who are actually deciding what happens in your parks, to your library, any new facilities in your area, community development, youth employment programs, all of those things. So have a say on who those people are going to be.
Yeah. Efeso, is the media misreading the popularity for Pacifica people towards UNASA? Is it driven, not from a sense that his policies are the best, but that Pacifica people have been left outside the political leadership room for such a long time now that just one of their own standing for mayor is enough to spark massive support?
Oh, and I think he's getting that support now. Well, we've always been Labour voters, you know, let's just put that out there. But our people are saying, what about one of ours? When will one of our sons, when will one of our daughters, one of our people stand for the highest office in the city? And there are a lot of people saying, oh, you know, we should stand for local board. And our people are saying, that's great, and that's wonderful, we want to be part of that. But we're also saying, how long are we going to wait for the first Pacific Island Prime Minister? How long are we going to wait for the first Māori Prime Minister, first Māori Mayor? And I wrote the blog that's got a little bit of attention on your side, which is suggesting, look, this is our people saying, wow, we can stop. We can actually be part of this city. We've committed to this city. When we marched for Advanced Pacifica, we marched because we're the ones who've often been cleaning this city for the last 40 or 50 years.
Right.
It's now high time that one of our own stood. And I'm glad that Reverend Ulnasa is standing. And you know, to be honest, there's perhaps some tension amongst those of us who have been long-time Labour supporters and now an independent who's standing, who's also a reverend. So it's got even further dynamics for us culturally because he's a reverend, you show respect to your reverend, and then you've got Labour who's endorsing Len Brown. People are saying, what do we do? But I think this is a real coming of age for our people. And whatever the result, what he has done is say the next Pacifica person who stands, it's going to be normal. People will accept it.
Surely Auckland, the largest Pacifica city in the world, it seems bizarre that we haven't had more Pacific leaders coming forward and being accepted in Auckland, isn't it?
I've said for a long time that both main political parties, and National and Labour, need to take a serious look at the way in which they're going to grow and nurture Pacifica people and Māori people, for that matter, within their own ranks. And we haven't seen it to the degree I think the Pacific community have wanted it. That's why Ulnasa's gone independent, and I congratulate him for taking this very bold step. A
question to both of you. Has Len Brown taken his progressive voting bloc for granted? Is it going to bite him in the arse?
I don't think he's taken it for granted, but I do think there's a number of key issues where he is going to have to front up to his supporters and explain himself and say what he will do going forward. The Ports of Auckland, a dispute that is still not resolved. Also the Sky City Casino stuff. And while that has now shifted into a national arena with the legislation,
He signed off on it.
but his governing body actually voted it down.
Yes.
And so he was out of step there. So there's a few niggles there that he's going to have to resolve. He's going to have to be upfront about them. That said, I think he's likely to get back in. The issue is going to be whether he can do anything, because as Fess pointed out, the centre-right have already got 3 elected. They only need 8 to have a majority and make Len just irrelevant. Len needs 10 more people at the table with him, or who will agree with him most of the time, and that's going to be a challenge.
Len needs some new mates, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, and I think he might have a few, mostly in the North Shore. I think the issue for Len is Julie's picked up on 2 of the big issues, the Ports of Auckland, the Sky City deal. He was also in Glen Innes with Nick Smith the other recently, saying this is what we're going to do with housing. In Glen Innes, they have moved houses, they've moved state housing. That community is saying, what the heck are you doing?
They've been gutted.
And he will pay the price for that.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with our second issue tonight, the GCSB mass surveillance bill has passed. Lower the flags to half-mast. It's a dark day when glib brain farts can justify opening the people of New Zealand up to the GCSB. Efeso, do you have any idea yet why the GCSB needs these powers?
No idea whatsoever. You look at the numbers that have turned out to protest, the numbers who've turned up to the town hall. This is a city, this is a nation that is saying no to this nonsense. No one understands why they need these powers. The Prime Minister is still getting away with his nonsense performance on Campbell Live, where he came across, the true arrogant mongrel that he is. And people are saying, oh, what a great performance in lying to the nation. This nation continues to accept and eat the rubbish that John Key is presenting to them. He has lied about the powers that the GCSB need, and now we're saying, oh yeah, well now they can assist the police, they can assist anybody they damn well please to offer this kind of surveillance. This is not acceptable, and I hope that New Zealanders say, you know, this is enough. We've seen a decline for National in the most recent poll. Let's hope that this continues. People have to see them for what they are.
Julie, we have an extraordinary situation here where John Key interprets the law one way and everyone else
That's right.
interprets it in a completely different way. Who's right?
Well, I think we all know who's right. In this case, John Key is right, but he is not correct.
Right.
So and I mean right with a capital R there, the reality is that the law is not going to be interpreted by John Key. The law is going to be interpreted by agencies, it's going to be interpreted by the courts, it's going to be interpreted by everyday people. And if everybody else has a view and the Prime Minister's view is different, well actually his view is kind of irrelevant once the law is passed. There'll be a lot of legal cases, I imagine, but it really concerns me that he's saying things like that the Law Society is wrong. Now, I don't always agree with the Law Society, but I do recognise their expertise and their skill. And the idea that he's saying I'm giving people assurances and the promises that I'm making in emails to journalists, but he won't put those assurances into the legislation, that doesn't smell right.
Fesso, did people focus too much on Key's slick Campbell Live interview rather than the reality of what the bill allows for? And how do you think the wider media have handled this issue?
Well, the media have been very clever. They have focused on what's going on in the left. So they've tried their best to take people's eyes off what's going on with this bill. And then he needed a good card to come out with, and it just so happened that he was well prepared for the first time in his life to come on Campbell Live and make the slick lies the way they were. So that helped him, and it allowed the media to take their attention off what's going on the left and focus on him and say he's done really well. And look at the nonsense that the Herald were coming out with, saying, oh, wasn't that a grand performance by the man? If we're commending people for their artistic ability in lying, then that is hardly the kind of politics our people are interested in. And so, the media have been friends to National. They continue to make up these games around Labour and their challenges around the leadership. There's nothing, and they will soon start making up ideas around, well, can we actually have a Green Labour coalition? Is this going to work? And then they're going to start talking about who's going to take what portfolio. Their attention is completely off the real issues, and Labour, the Greens, that left opposition have to make sure that they keep the media focused on the real issues and not let them get away with the rubbish that they present each week.
It's interesting, isn't it? If you look at a couple of the American editorials about this, they are genuinely shocked and surprised that New Zealanders have just allowed their government to go, oh, we're going to start spying on you now. Do you think a lot of people in New Zealand understand how far the GCSB bill will go?
No, I don't think they do. And when you're having these meetings, what's been good about the town hall meetings and the protests that have gone on the streets is it actually gives people the opportunity to ask basic questions, because we don't quite know. I don't know that people really understand surveillance, not unless the U-bomber, because we all know that they're watching you. But
24/7.
Most people just think, we're honest. People just think, I just go about my business. And because it's that basic, that's where most people operate from. They're not going to understand exactly what John Key and him, wiping the backsides of the Americans, what they're really up to.
Yeah. Julie, when does the state have a right to spy on a citizen? I mean, we accept that there should be agencies that are there for our protection. I think most of us sort of agree with that. But where's the limits?
I think you have to have a very high bar to get to a point where people are routinely surveilled. And we've had 2 terrorist acts in the history of this country, both of them against left-wing causes, the bombing of Trades Hall in Wellington, and of course the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior, both of which killed a person, each of them. And yet we know, as a unionist, I know that the people who are going to be surveilled by this government are not going to be the kind of people who did those terrorist acts. They're going to be people like me, who, I'm not doing anything that I think is illegal, but it might be something that they might not like. And, that's not okay to feel that, Judith Collins talked about the chilling effect of the possibility that the Prime Minister's office might be reading her emails. Well, imagine how people who have a lot less power than being, second in line to be leader of, Prime Minister at the moment, to be leader of the National Party, imagine how it must feel to have less power in the first place and then know that actually you could very easily be surveilled, or someone could be surveilled, and then by extension you get surveilled as well, because there's no way just to surveil one half of an email conversation.
Should we know how involved America is with our GCSB?
Definitely.
At the moment,
Without a
we
doubt.
seem to be handing a lot of information over to them unfettered without any questions. But we also had, I think, Russell Norman asking questions in the House this week, saying, well, we know the NSA has subsidised intelligence agencies in other countries, 100 million quid to the GCHQ in Britain. Are they doing it here? Now, Key won't answer that question. He said, well, neither confirm nor deny. But surely if a foreign intelligence agency is subsidising the domestic arm of it here in New Zealand, shouldn't we know about that?
And the thing is that the legislation does explicitly shift GCSB's role from being about non-citizens to being about citizens. They've now become a domestic agency. If that's being funded by another government, I think we totally have a right to know. What are they getting out of it?
Yeah. Final question to both of you. Will this issue hurt Key in the 2014 election?
Current indications are that it's hurting them now. The polls are starting to drop. We've just got to keep this up, but it will. And we are in trouble. You've talked about the sleeping hobbits. If we come next election and they get re-elected, it's over for this country, because we've just allowed this nonsense to continue. And we're just saying to them, look, you can do as you please now. We're the weak person.
Is it going to hurt them?
Yes, I think at the moment he's still in I can be trusted, and that trust is starting to wear off. And you see a point with, say, for example, a hostile employer where they shift from we can be trusted to you can't beat us. And that's exactly what Fez is talking about. If they won in 2014, they'll be in you can't beat us mode, and that's going to be absolutely appallingly awful for a whole lot of really important democratic institutions like unions, like the Human Rights Commission, which has been gutted actually. A whole lot of the things that actually make us a civilization.
Final question on this issue. Do you think we need a cyber bill of rights?
Yeah, I was reading some things you wrote, and I think we do. I think we need to know that we are protected. And even if it's not just about protection, we know that there's some There are standards. There are things that we have recourse on. So I think the Cyber Bill of Rights would be very apt for this time.
Cyber Bill of Rights?
Yeah, and I think in terms of the Ombudsman, for example, that those kinds of roles, I didn't really have an appreciation of them until relatively recently. And actually, they're really important in terms of keeping the state accountable.
Yeah.
And a Bill of Rights, along with an ombudsman process that could work with it, could be a really good option just for ordinary citizens.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight. The government have decided that the best thing to do in an unemployment environment of 6.4% is to crush unions a bit more. The Employment Relations Act will allow employers to refuse to negotiate a collective agreement with their employees, pay new workers less than the rate in the collective agreement, opt out of industry agreements in order to undercut their competitors on wages, deny workers meal and rest breaks, reduce the wages and conditions of vulnerable workers such as cleaners when a contract changes, dock the pay of workers taking partial strike action, impose more restrictions on the right to strike, refuse to provide employers the information they need to challenge an unfair redundancy or dismissal. Julie, what on earth? What on earth are any of these going to do to help employment in New Zealand?
Oh, exactly. We saw the same thing in the 90s, 7% unemployment, structural unemployment, to give power to employers to be able to say, you can come or go as I need you, whereas no dignity for workers. And they brought in the Employment Contracts Act, which did a lot of the same things. The thing is here, the dishonesty of actually gutting the Employment Relations Act by amendment, as opposed to putting up a new framework, having the debate properly. That's one of the things that really dismays me.
Excuse my French, but this just comes across like spiteful bullshit.
Yeah.
None of what they have proposed there is going to get one person an extra job in New Zealand.
Did anybody at the Job Summit, do we all remember the Job Summit?
Oh, yeah.
Did anybody at the Job Summit identify any of these as ways to create jobs or to lift employment?
So this is just an ideological kicking of the unions, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And we've seen that unions have been getting together these mass meetings, and there's another round underway at the moment, specifically around these law changes. And how do you undercut the ability of unions to do that? You cut back their rights of access to workplaces. You get rid of the pay deductions. You generally make workers too scared to be a part of a union.
Yeah.
And all of those things are mooted or happening. And unions are actually democratic institutions.
Yeah.
So again, we have yet another democratic institution this government is undercutting.
Efeso, with inequality rates in New Zealand expanding faster than at any other time in our history, how does weakening unions even further than they are now address any of those inequalities?
It doesn't. It actually just makes it worse. It makes you weaker, more vulnerable. Unions at their core for low-income, vulnerable families have always been about representation. They're about having a voice. And when you start to take away someone who'll stand with you and say, look, this actually isn't what I want. I actually would appreciate getting a little bit more money. I'd like a living wage. I'd like to be able to have flexible working hours. The ideas behind what the government is doing now is saying, look, we want to take those rights away. So people who are already vulnerable, these are the people who EPMU and NZDI are representing, these people already feeling a little bit vulnerable. Is this what I want? I don't want to get offside with my employer. And who cares what they do? Well, I'll just keep doing it. And we're into the whole scab employment thing that happened at the ports of Auckland. And now we're saying to people, well, if we take away the unions, we're taking away any right you have, any kind of recourse you have. And that causes me real concern, especially for Māori and Pacific families, many of whom, what we're like, we just say, okay, we often nod in obedience. We're an obedient kind of culture. Unions are there to protect us, and taking away these protections is going to run rife for our people.
A final question to both of you on this. Why do employers need these kinds of powers? I would have thought, this is just me being, a little bit out there on a limb, that they would have wanted workers who are well trained and who have got the qualifications to be able to enter the workplace. How does any of that deal with those issues?
Well, it doesn't, and it means that people feel less valued. They feel more like a cog in a machine than actually a human being in their own workplace. They lose dignity, they lose hope as well. And while that might be good in terms of obedience in terms of some workers, for other workers they will rebel against that. Unfortunately, because we have this high unemployment, you're very vulnerable if you rebel. And so I think there's a real problem here for employers. good employers get much better productivity.
Yeah.
But there's this culture of workers being disposable amongst a lot of employers. There's also a lot of bad management practices, but they then get blamed on the workers. So I just think, it's just so short-sighted. It's not actually going to help. It's going in the opposite direction from where we need to go.
Do bosses need more draconian sticks, or do they need a better trained workforce?
They need a better trained workforce, and the research shows quite clearly that when you're happy in the workplace, we're going to see increased productivity. We need staff rooms, workplaces that have high staff morale, where people are feeling supported, they're being trained, they're being stretched in their work. That's going to raise productivity. Anything outside of that is just going to be, what the government want are robots, and they just say, we'll turn you on for that work and we'll turn you off again when we need to turn you off. And that is not a good workplace environment for anybody.
More a feudal state than a democratic one, right? Let's wrap on the final word. Julie, your final word this week is?
My final word is to really acknowledge the victory for social liberals in terms of marriage equality on Monday coming into effect. But to also challenge people to think about, there was a lot of activity around marriage equality. It was a bit of a cause célèbre. But there are other issues that we could put the same effort into and make huge differences, like poverty, like a living wage. I actually think a lot of the issues around affordable housing, for example, one of the best ways to address those is actually to lift incomes. So, let's take that victory, let's harness that energy and that creativity and pour it into some other really important causes. And I would say poverty should be number one on that list.
Amen. Efeso, your final word this week?
Well, I'm excited about Reverend Ulnasa being in the mayoralty race, and what excites me about it is the fact that a lot of the criticism of Reverend Ulnasa has been, he's going to split the left vote. And whilst every part of my political being agrees with that, I think we've got to apply a cultural lens on this. This is about Pacifica people saying, I'm part of this city. I can stand for that office. I am very much a citizen of this city. I have every right, like anybody else, to stand for that office. And so whilst I wish him well, I wish the community well, to say, whether it's Pacific people, marginalised people, ethnic peoples, whatever, anyone who's ever felt on the margins can look at the example that Reverend Ulnasa is setting and say, I'm a part of this city. And that's what excites me about this election.
Proud moment for Auckland, proud moment. Thank you, Julie, thank you, Efeso. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word, the shallowness of National's GCSB defence in Parliament last night should shame us all. The intellectually bankrupt sophistry offered up by the government as their flimsy legal protection to our civil rights are made all the more facetious when you consider the loopholes within the legislation are so large, the GCSB could fly 1,000 drone strikes on hospitals through them and still Key would claim it was legal. This is how democracy dies, with the thunderous guffaws. The check and balance in Key's is Key's signing a warrant, having the bloke he appoints also sign it, and then getting his old school chum to carry out the spying. That's not a check and balance, that's a check that's totally unbalanced. I've posted up on the Daily blog what we should do as citizens to repeal this legislation come 2014. Please check it out this weekend and add your thoughts. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on